Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Billy Kelly, and you're very welcome to this, the last of 5 webinars this week, which QQI, in association with the National Academic Integrity Network, is hosting on the topic of artificial intelligence and this. Today's webinar will be delivered by Dr. Robin Crockett from the University of Northampton. By way of a very brief bio, Robin is the Academic Integrity Lead at the University of Northampton. And within that, his role has a specific focus on the investigation of complex contract cheating allegations where significant data analysis is required. He's actively involved with research and professional development activities in academic integrity, and many of you may have seen Robin presenting it in person and virtual events in recent years. Robin is a member of the UK QAA Academic Integrity Advisory Group, plus a member of the European Network for Academic Integrity and the International Centre for Academic Integrity. Today's webinar will address the potentials in the intelligence tools and what that might mean for us as educators. Robin's presentation is entitled AI Writers, Threat or Opportunity. Now, throughout this, questions are most welcome. Please put these in the chat and we'll aim to get to as many of these as possible towards the end of the session. We may pause at some point, right, okay, to capture some questions, right, okay, at points through Robin's session. Robin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone see me and hear me? I'm assuming that you can. Yeah, not much to add to that really, except that I'm a mathematician by background, so that does colour my take on these things. And whilst you're just mulling that over, I will try and fire up my slides again. It worked a few minutes ago, but who knows? There you go. You should have a friendly screen, shamelessly plagiarized from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But there we go. Don't panic. And that really is my
There's nothing
key
shown
message.
there, Robin.
Sorry?
Shown. There's nothing showing there. No slides.
Right. Okay. Oh, right. Sorry about that. Teams wants me to update drivers again. Let's try.
Yeah, we can see that now.
Aha, right. So, okay, there we go. So, before, yes, it was drawn to my attention that I wasn't actually running. I was just, I think, saying that don't panic is very much my key message here. There's been a lot of hype, a lot of overhype, not least by AI developers who want us to buy their kit and want us to buy further kit that they're working on, which will help us detect AI generated text. So, you know, a lot of the hype is marketing as well as journalists panicking and the such like. So I can't make my slides progress now. Ah, right. So, okay, there we go. That's who I am. I'm employed by the University of Northampton. I have an honorary position with Loughborough University because of my sort of mathematical activities in this field. And I'd like to acknowledge Sandy Dan at Loughborough, Irene, Glendinning, Thomas Lancaster, whom I'm sure you're all aware of, and Michael Draper, my colleagues on the QAA group, and yourselves for encouraging me to do this and hosting me this afternoon, and Turnitin UK, who've had me do a fair few webinars with them over the years. So, before I really get going, here's a timeline, and you can see the acceleration. You know, we've got the first iteration of GPT 4.75 years ago, give or take. That was very rapidly followed by GPT-2, which OpenAI kind of said was 10 times more powerful. It was good, but it was still clunky. It couldn't write you an essay or a report. You could get bits and pieces out of it, but there would have been a lot of work involved to put together an assignment. And then 2.75 years ago, GPT-3 came out. Roughly 100 times more powerful in some general sense than GPT-2. And this was the first version that was basically capable of writing essays, albeit not particularly good ones and not particularly insightful ones, but nonetheless essays that students could basically commission and submit and get credit for. And one of the big puzzles in all this, in all the current hype and things, is why it didn't happen when GPT-3 came out, because that really was the milestone here. That's the start of these models, these softwares basically becoming a problem for us. Anyway, we move on a little bit and we get to GPT 3.5, which is basically what's in ChatGPT, about 4 months ago now. Not much of a change in the model and the database from GPT-3, but a hugely improved and fine-tuned user interface. A user interface that you could basically talk to, albeit by typing in questions or typing in sentences. And that is the main improvement. I think that's what's really caused the panic in quotes and the hype, because it's something that responds in a vaguely human-like way. If you've not had a play with it, do so. But you'll find, or already will have found, that if you sit down with it and you kind of type in a question, and I'll come on to a bit more of this in a moment, you'll get an answer. You'll get a few sentences or a couple of paragraphs. And they generally make sense, even if they're not fantastically insightful. And it is, it is sort of human-like. And then a big jump again, 2.5 weeks ago with GPT-4. And that's supposedly 40% more accurate in some not particularly well-defined sense than GPT 3.5. But what you do get is fewer so-called hallucinations. And what hallucinations means in this context is where you type in something and you get a completely irrelevant response, where the software has picked up something that just doesn't make sense in any human sort of way. And you sit there scratching your head thinking, how on earth has the computer come back to me with this? So that was still a significant problem with ChatGPT, or still is a significant problem with ChatGPT. But OpenAI claim they've much reduced that type of problem in GPT-4. And then most recently, we've got Bard, which is based on a different model, different software. That's come out 10 days ago, basically. And I haven't found a meaningful comparison between Bard and GPT-4 or ChatGPT, but I found a few reviews and comments that are saying that it tends to give more details, so less waffle and more details than ChatGPT, etc. I have not yet had a chance to play with it. So that's where we're sitting. We've got that accelerating timeline. So who knows when GPT-5 or 4 point something's going to come out, or the next version of Lambda, which Google might call Bard 2 or might call something else. We don't know. And a couple of years ago, coming up, I was doing some investigation on a few assignments that got referred to me because the tutors couldn't work out who on earth had written them. And I played with several online essay bots trying to mimic the text that was in those student submissions with various degrees of success, but I got bored and I wanted to see how far I could push these essay bots. And I got one of them to write me a side of A4 essay on the role of Zabaglione in the French Revolution. It's just a nonsense title that came to me. And this is the first few paragraphs of what I got back, complete with the references are from the essay bot as well. So, you know, I'm not expecting everybody to read all of this. I'm not going to test you on it. And the main reason I'm showing it to you is because of what's coming up on the next slide. But essentially, we've got 3 paragraphs of reasonably well-written English, pulling up stuff from all the texts it's been trained on the French Revolution and the context of it, and a little bit of timeline and a little bit of history. And I'm not an historian, so I don't know how good the history is. I've shared this with a few people and none of them have got back to me and said the history is completely wrong. So that's what I got, August, September time, 2021. This is what I got in January playing with ChatGPT. I put in the same title and I got this. Zabaglione is a dessert traditionally made with egg yolks, sugar and marsala wine, which is whipped to create a light fluffy custard. It is believed to have originated in Italy. I'm not aware of any specific role that Zabaglione played in the French Revolution, right? Now, this is the software writing this. These 4 sentences in their entirety are from ChatGPT. So we then get a sentence on what the French Revolution was, and then another interesting sentence. The causes and effects of the revolution were complex and far-reaching, and it is unlikely that a dessert would have played any significant role in the events of that time. So the software and this hugely refined user interface have sifted the bits of the question basically into the 2 parts, Zabaglione and the French Revolution, had the software equivalent of a head scratch, and then basically got back to me saying they can't find any links in the database. Which is a shame because I was looking forward to having more fun with nonsense titles, but there we go. So, with that as an illustration to how far things have come in the 15, 16 months between these, the 2 events, what are these softwares? And do remember, they are just software. These text generation tools are basically enhanced variants of what are called large language models, abbreviated LLM. And a language model is basically a probability model or a statistical model of texts that it's been taught with. And in this context, we can consider texts as sequences of words. And those sequences can be modelled in terms of individual words or things we call n-grams, which loosely means phrases. So a 2-gram is a pair of words, a 3-gram is a triple of words. Or we could actually split some words up into sort of stems and aphyses. So we would, we take a word like speaking, and the main bit is speak, and the affix is ing. So there's all sorts of natural language processing can be applied to the text to break them up into words, combinations of words and parts of words, generally referred to as tokens. And then a generative language model is one that you can interrogate or type questions into. And a large language model, like OpenAI for GPT and Google for Lambda, is a large or very large version of the above. And that's large in terms of the number of texts that are used to train it, and therefore the very large database of texts sitting behind it. And a useful source of reading here is a paper by Murray Shanahan, based at the University of London and working on these sorts of models, is talking about large language models. I think it's still in press. I don't think it's quite out yet, but there is the preprint there. And then in the English Guardian, back in January, John Norton wrote a good piece, which is available online, picking up on basically Murray Shanahan's work. So you can get quite a lot of good informed background on these things reasonably straightforwardly. So that's what they are. How do they work? Well, if you ask one of these things, ChatGPT or Bard, or maybe some yet to come out, a question, what you are in effect doing is giving the software an instruction. So it's not a question in the same way that you might be asking me questions later on. It's an instruction. And paraphrasing from Shanahan, what you're basically doing is saying, here's a fragment of text. Tell me how this fragment might go on. According to your model of the statistics of human language, what words are likely to come next? Right? So it's not thinking, it's algorithms chug, plough through its texts, see what the most likely next several words are, and that's what you get back. So basically, even though it might look like original human written text, every word that comes back is a word from the software, from the database, from what it's been trained on. So effectively, everything you get in an output is plagiarized because the software doesn't tell you where it got any of the words from. And just to take an example, the children's nursery rhyme in English, certainly. I hope that you're aware of it in Ireland too. Well, this doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you went to the two words Humpty Dumpty, what you're effectively doing is asking the software which words commonly associate with Humpty Dumpty in its model. Those of us familiar with the nursery rhyme would expect the model, the LLM, to return sat on a wall, possibly with further lines and verses from the nursery rhyme, just depending on the details of the programming. And I've tried this on a few essay bots, and if you enter Humpty Dumpty, you do generally get sat on a wall and bits and pieces from further into the nursery rhyme. So it's not thinking, it's basically doing statistics according to its programming and the body of texts that it has to work with. And just to develop some ideas there, these tools don't write. We talk about AI writers and things, but they don't sit down and think, you know, I've got an essay on X or a report on Y to write. Let's go and do some research. Let's have a think and let's write it down. They're pulling runs of words that already exist from its database and stitching them together according to its programming to generate sentences and paragraphs. So, because it's probabilistic, it tends to go with the things that appear most commonly and not with the things that occur least commonly in its database. But that is influenced by the precise question you ask and any follow-up questions. But broadly, if you set the AI, and in quotes, a writing task on which it's got lots of similar and related examples, what you'll probably get returned in the output is lots of very short runs of words. A few words from source 1, another few words from source 2, a word from source 3, a couple of words from source 4, and so on. Nothing that, for example, Turnitin similarity checking or any other similarity checking text matching software would really recognize. But if you set that same AI a task on which it has few similar or related examples, something that's a bit more niche, it's got less to pick from. So the chances are that amongst all the bits and pieces of a couple of words here and a word there and things, you will get some longer runs of words pulled from specific sources. And maybe some more hallucinations because it hasn't got so much to work with. And I've managed to have a bit of a play with this, and so far this stands up. That if you give it a relatively niche writing task, what you get back, if you put it through text matching software, it will recognize runs of words. So it doesn't necessarily tell you that it's AI generated, but it finds source materials for you. And a more interesting thing, which is something you know, that Bard and ChatGPT have both fallen foul of with regard to the Webb telescope, is if you set the AI a writing task where there are lots of repetitions of the same error in its database, what you get back is quite likely to contain another repetition of that same error. So that's beginning to give us some clues that what we can do to tweak assessments. You know, set something niche to your teaching materials, your course materials, maybe something that's a little left field, a little less mainstream thought, and the AIs are going to struggle with it relative to, you know, stuff that's more common. And if you set it something where, you know, you are aware that an awful lot of people have gotten something wrong, and there's likely to be a lot of occurrences of that same wrongness in the database, it's quite likely that a student, in quotes, illegally going to a bot to get an essay written will get an essay back with that same error repeated. So at the other side of things, what can we look for? Well, I say we, I'm no longer a student-facing member of staff. I don't teach and assess anymore, but I can remember when I did. So pulling together some key points, a text that's been entirely AI generated or maybe part human written and then put through an AI to improve it could typically appear as having reasonably good English or other language, but quite likely to be verbose. And within that, containing hyperbole and circumlocutions and absences of insight and non sequiturs. So, broadly speaking, what we could call waffle. You'll quite possibly see some unstudent-like, in quotes, weird words and phrases. You'll quite likely get some out of sequence or sort of numerically inconsistent ranges and comparisons. You'll quite likely get inconsistent spelling and grammar conventions, because at the moment, with most of these things in English, a lot of the English is American English, but a reasonable amount is British English. The AI doesn't know about that, or at least not yet. So you get sentences with all sorts of mixtures of, legitimate spelling and grammar conventions, but not anything a human would write. And you can also get fake and spurious and out of timeline references. Now, that's not the best bullet point. I'm kind of covering references as in citations, but also references as in factual references. And so you've got that set of things you could reasonably expect to get. So how does that manifest? Well, loosely connected paragraphs lacking flow and development of ideas. Repetition of the same content over successive paragraphs, particularly, paragraphs that look introductory. You'll get a lot of statements and assertions, but at the expense of perception and critical evaluation. So, a lot of points, a lot of peripheral points, but not enough focus. And then grammatically correct, but padded sentences, sometimes containing subject inconsistent clauses. So you'll get a two-part sentence, the two clauses separated by a comma, semicolon, whatever. And the first part makes perfect sense. The second part makes perfect sense, but they're not related to each other, but it's all grammatically correct. And the phrase that I've been using to bracket all these things is uninsightfully robotic. And that's actually not too far from the literal truth, behind the programming. So some of those points are probably familiar. Some of you have probably seen assignments with lack of focus and verbosity and incorrect references and factual references and things. So, and that's a bit of a worry in all this, and particularly how some of the AI detectors work and will work, because the sort of AI writing style or text generation style is not dissimilar to how some less assured, less confident students write when they haven't sufficiently understood the core of an assignment. So students who tend to equivocate, or in brackets waffle, around some broadly relevant points rather than risk focusing on the wrong ones and thereby losing credit. And that side of things might have implications for assessment criteria. not necessarily to the advantage of students who might fall into this category. But most assessments have, in some term or another, requirements for appropriate critical evaluation in order to meet the learning outcomes. We expect our students to think about and criticise and evaluate what they have researched for their assessment. We might have to review how we phrase that, how we interpret it, probably making things more rigorous in light of these AI writing tools. Just to try and help students raise their game a bit, to not appear to be writing like AIs, leaving the AIs behind, or at least the current generation of AIs behind. Okay, now, some examples, and these are examples that I got back in August, September 2021, when I was trying to persuade essay bots to reproduce, to mimic the stuff I was seeing in the few assignments that had been passed to me for investigation. So this is what I was doing when I got bored and asked for the essay on the role of Zabaglione in the French Revolution. And broadly speaking, they were assignments on economics and business studies. So one thing that came out was I got the first part of a sentence which read, UK unemployment rose from 5% to 5% after the 2008 crash. So there's nothing wrong with the English there, but it doesn't mean anything, because the AI doesn't understand that the to has got to be bigger than the from. And then another one, which is really quite messy, however you consider it, is leading climate scientists concluded that the Earth warms in the temperature range of 7 degrees to 11 degrees Fahrenheit, brackets 1990 to 200 degrees Celsius, between 1990 and 2100. Now, however you interpret 7 degrees Fahrenheit to 11 degrees Fahrenheit, you do not get 1990 to 200 degrees Celsius. So again, it kind of makes sense in English, but the meaning is stripped from it because the AI just doesn't understand the 7 degrees to 11 degrees Fahrenheit and has just found numbers in its database that go with those numbers that are also in its database. And then go back to 2012 and Le Pen's message was essentially the same as it is today. A salty brew of jeremiads against, quotes, Europe of Brussels, globalization and the French political establishment. Now, I had to go and look up the word jeremiad. I hadn't come across it before, but it is correct in that context. But would you expect an undergraduate student not doing a literature subject to come up with the phrase salty brew of jeremiads? I don't know where it's come from, but it's not anything that I would expect. And when I passed this back to the tutors who'd asked me to take a look, they had a chuckle about it as well and basically said, if only we'd seen that, we'd have known, sort of thing. So, and then the last one, which is kind of a grammatical mix-up. Workers are the backbone of the organisation, and his, so singular mismatched to a plural, reactions to other people and the environment vary greatly, depending on the value and principle he follows according to his life. So sentences like that are really all too common in AI generated text, with those mismatches between tenses, mismatches between singulars and plurals and things. Right, now, I'm not expecting anyone to read this or the next slide in any detail. I've put them up simply to highlight some of the mismatches we get in sentences and in paragraphs. And I'm highlighting two things here. American English Z spelling and British English S spellings in globalization. And then a major advantages of globalization is, this mismatched singular and plural. And then I don't know where the last four words have come from, like a one nation, but they don't fit there. That's not good grammar. We just expect like one nation or like a single nation, perhaps. But somewhere in its database, the software has found that four-word phrase, found that it's been used in a related context to the rest of the sentence, and just shoved it in at the end. And then the second of these two slides, there's, in the first paragraph, there's a missing full stop where I've put back to back, or front to front, in fact, square red braces after China in the top line, because clearly when you read that, there's a new sentence starting with "in the year," but the AI hasn't put it in. Coming down a few lines, there's a full stop with a space before as well as after. And then we've got economical impacts. Now, economical is a perfectly legitimate word, but not in this context. This should be economic impacts and economic advantages and economic disadvantages. And again, that's another thing that you might see. And then we've got some more S's and Z's with globalization. And then we've got a correct economic in the last paragraph there, as very different to economical in the first paragraph. And both this slide and the previous slide, this is 3 paragraphs obtained at one go. So I'm not mixing and matching from different goes on different essay bots. This slide and the one before, it's 3 paragraphs arranged at one go, at one sitting from the same essay bot. And then just to start to wind up, we've got some pointers here, some very general pointers, because this is very much a work in progress for the current generation of AI writers, because they're not sentient yet and they're not independent yet. We're not at the point where a HAL-like AI, as per the famous film 2001, A Space Odyssey, replies to an illegal assignment writing request with, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that." We're nowhere near that. But these tools are here to stay and are developing rapidly. Our students will graduate into workplace environments where the use of such tools is increasingly the norm. So as well as the sort of negative side of this, we very much need to teach our students how to use these tools properly, with insight and with integrity, rather than just sit down, use them, assume what they get back is completely appropriate and accurate and relevant, and shove it in something, only to get caught out later when you know, they've essentially, excuse me, had an AI hallucinating on them. And then just a very late afterthought. Been a few articles in the last month or so, a few blog pieces and things here and there, with the sort of rumour that AI text generators are killing off essay mills and essay ghostwriters and things. Personally, I don't think that's likely, or at least not yet, with the current versions of things. I think in the short term, lots of students will be curious for good and bad reasons, so including dishonest students trying to save money they'd otherwise spend with essay mills. However, several organisations have launched or are about to launch, intending to launch, AI text generation software. There are some online tools out there. Some are better than others. But these software will never be silver bullets. They will never be 100% accurate. There will always be false positives and false negatives. But they will likely be accurate enough to catch enough AI written work that students submit when they should have been doing it themselves. So likely, you know, in, I don't know, 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time, 18 months' time, it's likely that students who are determined to cheat will go back to human essay assignment ghostwriters. You know, because, you know, they're faced with the choice. They can spend little or nothing on an AI, but with the relatively high probability of routine detection and routine disciplinary action, ... Or they can spend more on a human ghostwriter with relatively low probability of routine detection. So, you know, what would you do if you're trying to get your qualification dishonestly with no effort? You know, which way do you go? So after this initial short-term interest in these AI text generators, I suspect students who are fundamentally dishonest, and there are a few students falling into that category, they'll return to human writers. But in the longer term, these AIs, so-called AIs, will continue to improve. So we need to do stuff. We need to think, we need to start thinking, we need to start revising policies and practices now if we haven't already. But we do not help ourselves if we panic. And that's where I'd like to end and try and gracefully exit.
Robin, thank you very much for that. There's Cook's tour of AI, right? Okay, and in some sense, what it might mean. I'm going to, I will attribute it uninsightfully robotic. I like it as a phrase. Can I put to you? There's a question that's appeared very early, right? Okay, in the chat from Mairead Pratchke, but I think it captures a lot of what's going on out there. This sort of angst about who should set the moral and ethical guardrails for artificial intelligence, and really going back to Tuesday's letter from these tech leaders. Asking for a pause of at least 6 months, right, okay, in AI. And I wonder about your thoughts on that.
Well, it would be good if the people creating the AIs could ensure that they actually were intelligent, and so they could tell when they were being asked to do things that they shouldn't do. You know, going back to my penultimate slide with the sort of joke about how. But we're not there yet. And for all the statements in the letter a couple of days ago, it didn't particularly look like the signatories of the letter were really thinking of going that way either. They're just asking for a pause. I think they realise that they've potentially let the genie out of a bottle, and they themselves don't have any answers. They've kind of been working in a moral and ethical vacuum for a few years, and then all of a sudden they've got this kit that can do really quite astonishing things. You know, for all that they're not truly intelligent, they are still astonishing. It's still you know, incredible almost. But in the education sector, the higher education sector, I think we've got to define institution by institution or group of institutions by group or organisation by organisation. I think we've got to define our own, I don't know, policies, our own ethics on this, if you want. And we've got to teach our students how to use these things, which is part of it. But the other part of it is, as well as how to, is when to. And one thing that's just beginning to seriously cross my desk here, although I don't have a lot of time to do much on it yet, is we're thinking of giving our tutors, many of whom are not really up to speed on this at all, the option to put a statement at the start of their assignment briefs, which basically says, you must do this yourself. You may not use AI text generation tools. If that statement doesn't appear on an assignment brief, students can or can't as they choose. Now, I accept that that's kind of a holding position, because not enough of us know enough about these things to really go that much further. And I'd rather have it as a permissive thing. So a tutor tells them when they can, rather than when they can't. But you know, trying to keep things clear, it's usually easier to tell students when they can't do something than leave it open to themselves to judge when they can. So we are looking at the sort of the prohibitive side rather than the permissive side of any such statements. And yeah, I think we'll just all have to talk to each other within QQI and NAME and the QAA and the various integrity groups that have grown up in England and the ENAI and the ICAI and things, possibly with ministers and government departments. But I can't see anything useful coming out of the IT or the AI industry for the time being.
Yeah, that's one of the points, right, okay, that was made earlier in the week by others was that from a student perspective, students, right, may not be aware that they're actually using AI, as AI is built into more and more of the everyday software that students and staff use.
Well, absolutely. And that echoes a conversation I had with my new boss yesterday, because my role changed slightly and I now report directly to our academic registrar. And it was very much in the context of Microsoft have announced that they're bundling some version of GPT into Office.
Mm. I
don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know if anybody has actually seen what it might look like. So we don't know if it's something that a student could turn off or turn on. We don't know if a student uses it, if Microsoft is going to harvest what they write to add to the training materials, which could have very serious confidentiality issues. So there's potentially a lot to think about.
And Robin, you mentioned at the beginning, right, okay, that you've done. I wondered about last week's letter, right, okay, from UCISA asking Turnitin, right, okay, to hold off on the release of their AI writing detection capabilities.
Yeah, I've got to be slightly circumspect here. I'm on the so-called Turnitin AI advisory board. I haven't quite got the title right. We have not been allowed to play with the text detection tool. We've been consulted on other aspects, but we have not seen the tool. So we don't know what it can do. And being asked to endorse a tool, or being being perceived as endorsing a tool that you haven't seen, that you don't actually know what it can do, we can't. And my understanding is that Turnitin have agreed to kind of pause this and give institutions the ability to say no and have it disconnected for the time being, which in one sense is disappointing, because it's kind of an acknowledgement that their tool is maybe still a bit too prototype. I don't know, please don't quote me on that, because I haven't seen it. I don't know how prototype it is or not. I don't know what it's been trained on. And nor does anybody else in on that advisory board. So I was at the meeting on Monday where this came to a head and provoked what I gather was an emergency high-level meeting at Turnitin, which has resulted in this proposed ability just to disconnect it at the moment. But there's the other side of it. If Turnitin rolled out the tool and it wasn't ready to go, Google had to pull Bard for a month or so. They were putting themselves potentially at enormous risk of rolling out something prematurely. And at Northampton and other universities I know, when the date was announced of April the 4th, there just wasn't enough notice to bring policies up to speed, practice up to speed, train tutors, ... And it was just all a bit baffling. I don't know what happened, but I'm pleased that Turnitin have taken a deep breath and allowing institutions the discretion to have it or not at this point. And I hope that they do broaden it out and let people like me and you and things have a play with it in the background. Do some testing of it, some evaluation of it, and then we can inform Turnitin properly as to, we think this is great, but, or you really need to sort aspect X out. It keeps getting this wrong. But we're not in a position to do that. So I'm awaiting developments from Turnitin, as I'm sure everybody else here is. And I just hope they're a bit more insightful and a bit more thoughtful about what we actually have to do at universities and other HEIs.
Likely, and again, don't compromise any. Will some universities choose to use it and others not? Will there be a real world testing ground?
Well, I don't know, but I suspect, I suspect that'll be the case. But I think, based on the opinion in the meeting that Health and UKISA and what's it had on last Monday afternoon, where I'd been asked to be in attendance by Health, I'm not sure that many in the UK will go with it at this point. I think we all will in due course when we know what it can and can't do. And I think it has the potential to be very, very useful, but we need to know what it can and can't do. Excuse me. You're mute.
Somebody may have muted me.
Not me.
Robin, I'm conscious, right? Okay, that we're coming to the end of this session. And thank you very much, right, okay, for this insightful tour about this accelerating timeline you've identified, right, okay, of AI development, and your pointers, right, okay, to some of the directions that we might go in terms of policing, in some sense, its use of this.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
thank you very much indeed.
I
for this.
don't have to run away immediately if there are one or two very pressing questions best done at this point, depending on what you guys have to do. But I'm very happy to liaise and work with anyone who wants to contact me, because it's in our common interest. This is going to hugely shake the sector up. And we don't want to panic.
I think that's an offer, right? Okay, that absolutely will be taken up, Robin. This morning, right? Okay, I was contacted, right, in relation to whether or not, and this was about the National Academic Integrity Network doing some work on developing guidelines, right? Okay, for staff and for students on the use of AI tools. And I do think it's absolutely a joint enterprise between all of us, right? Okay, it doesn't make any sense, right? Okay, for us to go off into our own corners and try and solve these kinds of issues themselves. So, thank you very much for that offer. I am going to wrap it though, because we're coming to the end of this time.
Okay.
This session has brought us to the end of this week of webinars dealing with artificial intelligence and what it may mean for higher education. Across the week, we've heard from a variety of voices reflecting different perspectives on the opportunities, threats, and challenges that face higher education. On Monday, we heard from Professor Sarah Howard from the University of Wollongong, who spoke to us about both the similarities and differences between AI and our past engagements with disruptive technology. AI is now compromising our education model, and if we are to engage with AI, all of us in education, need to develop our own competencies in artificial intelligence, and we need to understand and appreciate the competencies of the AI systems themselves. And your contribution today, Robin, has been really good on that. On Tuesday, Professor Phil Newton from Swansea University examined the challenges for online exams in the age of ubiquitous AI. And a key point was that you can't separate out the technology from the assessment. And Bill argued that in the short run, we have to manage the disruption. In the medium term, we probably have to redesign assessment. And in the long term, we may have to redesign higher education.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
I think Phil stressed was about the importance of constructive alignment, that a good assessment should be a measure of what a student can do, and that process may be more important than product. And he also counseled, and I think this is a really important point, against allowing ChatGPT or other AI tools to make us focus on one aspect of assessment, for example, integrity, at the cost of another aspect, for example, authenticity. That we shouldn't get overly focused, right, okay, on one aspect at the cost of another. And what we heard on Wednesday, we heard from Dr. Brenda McDermott from the University of Calgary, and she was looking at artificial intelligence tools through the lens of assistive technologies, as she put it herself, challenging a panic narrative around generative AI. And again, an echo, Robin, with what you started with about don't panic. And Brenda made the point that past technologies have destabilized educational practice, and resistance to these technologies may dispatch diversity. And she also went on that labeling them as assistive may create an otherness, requiring students to self-identify as diverse learners. And she very much made a point that we need to move from equality, that is the ability to access, to ensure that we have tools that work for all users, that is equity.
Yes.
And she also identified a point, it came up in the chat as well, about the potential biases with AI and their neglect of non-dominant user experiences, practices, and knowledge. So the biases, right, okay, that are part on that. On Thursday, we have diverse of National Academic Integrity members, Perry Sher, Yvonne Kavanagh, Greg O'Brien, Brian O'Mahony, and Monica Ward, and they discussed their differing perspectives and shared their thoughts on AI and what it may mean for higher education. And they gave us insights on developments in desired, intended, and actual developments in Irish HEIs. And Robin, you have, in some sense, been the cross on the T at the end of this, right? Okay, having given us, right? Okay, this tour, as I say, the Cook's tour of this timeline of development of AI and how we might identify their use in assignments, etc., etc. So, thank you very much for all of this. And as we come to the end of this week, I hope all our participants, right, okay, have enjoyed and been enlightened by this series. And while the series of webinars may not have provided all the answers, it has certainly left us a lot wiser. Our final act is to express our appreciation to the team in QQI who made this week possible. And a special note of appreciation for Caoimhe Marshall, who kept the whole thing running smoothly right across the week. So thank you all. The recordings, right, okay, of this week's webinars will be up on the QQI website, right, okay, in the coming week. Thank you all, right, okay, for your participation and your contribution in the chats across the week. Thank you all very much. And Robin, thank you again.
Could I just say one
Sure.
thing? Anyone who wants to contact me, could I suggest you contact QQI and they can forward stuff rather than trying to rummage around and find contact details?
Sure.
Yeah.
Will do.
Thank you.
Robin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye
Thank
all,
you for the invitation.
And enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.